former Silicon Valley CEO whose life was upended an injury on Mount Kilimanjaro, none other than Miss Nancy Deyo. Welcome. Welcome, Miss Nancy on Entrepreneurship 101. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Yes, thank you, Daniel. I am an entrepreneur. I'm a former Silicon Valley CEO. My company was called Purple Moon, and it was a new entry in the girls' entertainment space with girls' games, CD-ROM software, internet, collectible objects, books. Our mission was to get girls to put their hands on technology so they would grow up to be technologically competitive with boys who were playing video games at the time. I was a first-time CEO in the Valley, like many listeners, I'm sure, out there in Entrepreneurship 101. But I'm here today to not talk about the success of Purple Moon, but to talk about what I consider to be a failure. 9 out of 10 startups in Silicon Valley fail, but we usually only tell the stories of the successes. So I look forward to talking about what we did well, what we did right, what we did wrong, and everything that I learned from the business
Yeah, so
adventure.
well said, Miss Nancy, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Here on Entrepreneurship 101, we celebrate you, we salute you. Thank you for sharing your wow experience to the world. So today, let's talk about being you, being a former Silicon Valley. So you climb Mount Kilimanjaro on paper, where you're someone who could do hard things, and then injury on that mountain unraveled everything. Walk us to the edge. What did you think was happening to your body for those first weeks and months?
Well, Kilimanjaro for me was more than an endurance test. It was really my redemption and to prove after having to sell my business, Purple Moon, to a competitor that I could still be successful, still be strong, still achieve. But there I was at 16,000 feet on the roof of Africa. I was 41 years old. I was alone in this tiny orange and gray tent, and I could not feel my legs. I felt like they were disconnected from my body, and the pain was so fierce. It felt like someone had driven a steel rod through my spine. And the only thing I could think at the time is I'm probably dying. Well, clearly that didn't happen, but I didn't summit either. It was yet another disappointment for me. And when that happened, something really fundamental shifted. I realized that pushing hard and pushing faster had worked all my life, but it wasn't going to work for me anymore. And what I learned over the next 15 years was that resilience isn't necessarily about pushing harder. It's about finding a different way to live.
Finding to live, definitely. So, Miss Nancy, you were a high achiever in a culture that worshiped discipline, endurance, and pushing through. How did those same strategies that made you successful become the very things that kept you sick for years?
Yes, the everything I knew about how to run my life was based on pushing and endurance and control. And when I hurt my back on Mount Kilimanjaro and injured my spine, I was suddenly riddled with chronic pain, completely bedridden, addicted to opioids, and all I kept trying to do was to push through the pain and push to get up and try to walk, push to stand. And it took me years and years to realize that the very thing that I had organized my life around was actually hurting me. And every time the pain started to recede, I would push hard and crash again, which would lead to more time in bed and more debilitation of my body.
Miss Nancy, you've spent 15 years being misdiagnosed and told that nothing was wrong while you knew something was deeply wrong. What does do person psychologically to gaslit by the very system that's supposed to help you?
That's such a great question. After I injured my spine, doctors in Africa, in the UK, and then in the US all told me I was fine. But I knew my body and I knew something was really wrong. And I still remember that feeling when the third doctor, this is my hometown doctor in San Francisco, California, came into my hospital room with all of my tests in his hands. And I lay there in a hospital bed. I couldn't walk. There was a commode next to the bed because I couldn't even make it to the bathroom. And he says to me, "Good news, you're fine." It just felt like my suffering was somehow being disbelieved. And when you're told over and over that nothing's wrong, but you know something is, you start to question yourself. You wonder if it's all in your head. You stop trusting and listening to your body and your own instincts. And that's really devastating because over time, the damage is more than just the pain, it's the damage to your self trust. And that's really hard to rebuild.
Ms. Nancy, you've spoken about how gender biases influence how doctors treat pain. Give us a specific example, a moment when you knew in your bones that a male doctor was treating you differently because you were a woman.
Yes, just to speak broadly for a moment, the same pain gets treated differently depending on whether you're a man or a woman. And research shows that when men and women present with the same pain system symptoms, that doctors prescribe painkillers for the men and anxiety medication for the women. So here's my moment. After I was finally operated on, after doctors finally discovered that two vertebrae in my spine were broken, I went to see my doctor after my first surgery. My surgeon came into the room. He was so happy. He said his surgery had been flawless. I had 14 pieces of titanium bolting my spine together. I was beyond miserable. And I told him how badly I was hurting. And he said, "You seem really anxious. I think we need to refer you to a psychiatrist." Now, he was right that mental health and physical pain are deeply intertwined, but I was sent home not with something for the pain, but with a prescription for a really powerful anti anxiety medication, Ativan, and a referral to a psychiatrist. So the challenge is that the gender bias can really change how doctors interpret what they're seeing and what they're hearing. And the same symptoms get read differently. As I mentioned, men's treated as physical, women's treated as emotional. This is even a stronger issue and a stronger bias, often with people of color. Now, my medical record is filled with the words anxious and depressed. And a word like that can change everything. They change the treatment, they change the urgency, they change the health outcome. It's much harder to get the care that you need.
Thank you for sharing your thought to the world, Miss. And tell us, you become dependent on opioids during this journey. Most people think you know that opioid dependency looks like, and they're probably wrong. What does opioid withdrawal actually feel like from the inside, and what do you want people to understand about how someone like you ended up there, Miss Nancy?
Yes. As I was carried down the mountain, even before I got to medical care, I was given opioids by a mountain climber. So dependence can begin in very unexpected ways. Opioids don't just relieve pain, they teach your body that it just can't function without them. So after I became very dependent, about 5 years into my injury, I went to a rapid detox program at the Mayo Clinic. It was like ripping a Band-Aid off of a wound. I was pulled off of all of the opioids within the first week. And when those drugs drop out of your system, you're violently nauseous, your skin is crawling, you can't sleep, and emotionally and mentally, you're just wrought. I mean, every sound is sharp, every feeling is amplified, every worry is magnified. So opioids, they work so well at first. They reduce pain, they calm your nervous system, they create a lot of relief. But your body adapts so quickly. Within a few weeks, I was needing more opioids after my injury. And by the time I was operated on 6 months later, I was deeply dependent on them. Suddenly, you're not just taking them to feel better, you're taking them to keep from feeling worse. And that withdrawal is overwhelming mentally, physically, neurologically, and breaking that pattern is so hard. And in fact, I think that could be one of the reasons that opioid relapse rates after a rehabilitation program can be as high as 60%.
Miss Nancy, tell us. Okay, you've said that the patient often get blamed when doctors cannot find answers. Why do why does that happen, and what is the cause of that blame? Not just the patient but the quality of care they receive afterward.
When doctors can't explain the pain, the problem can become you, the patient. I learned some really scary things about myself poring over 2,500 pages of my medical record. I landed in the ER for the third time in 6 months for pain, and the admitting doc wrote, and I quote, that conversion disorder, factitious pain, and malingering have to be considered. And honestly, I did not know what those words meant. I had to look them up. Conversion disorder means there's no medical reason for your symptoms. Factitious pain means that you are making up the pain to get attention. And malingering, worst of all, means that you're exaggerating it on purpose. And sometimes you're drug seeking. So medicine, rightly so, is built around finding answers, about finding fixes for problems. So when there's not one, the uncertainty has to be resolved because everybody, the patient, the doctor, the whole medical system is uncomfortable. And a lot of times it's resolved by shifting the problem onto the patient. What can't be explained physically gets interpreted as psychological. And that's where it gets harmful because you're seen differently, and that changes everything about the care that you receive.
You were a CEO, your identity was likely wrapped up in a competence, achievement, and getting things done. What happens to that identity when you just can't sit, you can't work, you can't be reliable, when your body betrays every signal of success you built your life around?
I always had this mental image of who I was as a Silicon Valley CEO. I was wearing dark blue suit, I had a short haircut, I had a briefcase slung over my shoulder. I would stride through the airports on my way to meetings with great purpose. But after my injury, that image completely shifted. For 15 years, unable to sit, there I was, lying in bed in a hoodie and hospital pants, my hair flat against my head, the pillowcases soiled with sweat. So my identity was built on a role. being a CEO and the problem started when that role disappeared. It's not just losing it. You don't know who you are anymore. You don't know how to understand yourself. And when that collapses, you're on shaky ground. But the one thing I will say is that in the midst of the mess that I felt, it's also an opening, because if you can rebuild from that low place, it's less about the way you present yourself and more about the way you truly are in your authentic self.
Authentic self indeed. And Miss Nancy, what does failure look like when you're already failing to being yourself? You've said that pushing through stopped working. How did you know? What is signal you finally learned to hear that effort itself was now the enemy of healing?
Clearly, pushing and my style of aggressive endurance started to work against me. And I think I realized it when I hit the lowest point of low. And that was after I returned from the Mayo Clinic rehabilitation program. They had gotten me off the drugs. They had forced physical function. So instead of lying down, I was standing up, I was walking, I was starting to move my body. I felt victorious, but I had pushed so hard, so fast that I crashed and I was hospitalized again. And at that point, the doctor said to me, "We have nothing for you. We need to let you know that this may be your life. There is no solution to this problem. You need to learn to live with the pain." So I realized that I had to start to do things completely differently.
You write and speak about acceptance, Miss Nancy, but not resignation. What is the difference? What did acceptance actually look like on Tuesday morning when you woke up and pain was still there and nothing had changed?
As a woman who was in pain, I thought I had two choices: to fight that pain or to surrender to it. But I realized the third choice, as you asked, was acceptance. And after my life was turned upside down and the pain forced me into bed, I started working with a psychotherapist. She kept floating this idea of something she called the new normal, which to me was my life living horizontally and everything I would never be again in the world in my hard driving, fast moving entrepreneurial style. And so I just told her that I hated the new normal. And she said, it doesn't mean giving up. It just means giving in enough to stop fighting yourself. So for me, acceptance wasn't about liking what was happening. It was about stopping to fight with reality. And that's what created the big change in my life, because when I stopped fighting myself, I had the energy to rebuild around what I could do. And this led me, determined to reenter the world, but still lying down, to go back to graduate school, lying down on an army cot, and later travel again, stretched across 3 seats on an airplane, and then again later going back to work in a new career in women and girls empowerment.
Well said, Miss Nancy. And tell us, as a CEO, a former CEO of Silicon Valley, if you go back to the situation, what are you missing for that position?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
What are you missing the old you when you are at
Ah,
former Silicon Valley?
well, first of all, there was tremendous excitement and energy in Silicon Valley at the time that I was there. So you miss the challenge intellectually that you seek to replace. You miss the energy of the incredibly bright people around you. And you miss the opportunity to do something important and make good change. In my case, it was for young girls. But I've had to find a way to do that differently, not in a Silicon Valley company, but in the nonprofit world globally, trying to lift up girls.
Your forthcoming memoir is called Perilous Accent. The title works on two levels: the mountain and journeying through illness. What made you choose those two words? What would you hope a reader in the middle of their own hard thing feels when they see the title?
I really hope that readers will see not only the high stakes adventure in the desire to summit Kilimanjaro, but importantly, that the climb back out of the depths of illness can be every bit as treacherous and every bit as difficult. It's a physical climb, it's a mental climb, it's an emotional climb.
Mhm. Your Substack is called Life Inside Pain. For people living in pain, illness, loss, and anyone those life no longer responds to effort the way it once did. The last phrase is so precise. What does it mean to have life that does not respond to effort anymore? And how do you know if that's happening to you?
I think you need to do three things. I think you need to listen very closely to what your body is telling you. It will tell you the truth about where you need to slow down, where you need to stop, and to not let your mind and your drive overcome that pain that's giving you a message. Two, you need to focus on what you can do and what your body is capable of with its limits. And three, you need to find a different way that respects the discomfort, respects the limitations, but still allows you to move forward.
Definitely move forward, people. And to wrap up our discussion for today, Miss Nancy, you said the survival is often far messier than we expect. Give us a messy moment from your 15 years, something that did not make the polished version of the story, but is actually more honest and more useful than, well, neat narrative.
Survival for me was something that was very difficult to accept because it meant that I was completely dependent on my husband to be my caregiver. So here I was, this independent, hard driving CEO, suddenly not able to get into a shower on my own and wash my body. It had to be done for me. So the idea of being completely dependent on another human being, even if they love you, for all of your physical needs, your emotional needs, and all of the tactical day to day activities can be overwhelming. And people need to realize that it's true and that it's survivable.
Survivable, yes, I must. Nancy, can you please invite our listeners to support your upcoming book, your Substack, or anything you want to promote on Entrepreneurship 101?
Yes, I'm here to tell all the entrepreneurs out there that there's life even after a business that doesn't end the way you want it to, that you can take those great skills that you have and find another path.
Yes, find another path. People, how about your upcoming memoir, Miss Nancy?
Yes, I hope that all of the readers out there will follow me on Substack. And then my forthcoming memoir, Perilous Ascent, will be something that they can enjoy and hopefully see a little bit of their own life in my story.
Definitely. And I have one more question, Miss Nancy, before I will let you go. There's no going back to whom you were before Kilimanjaro. What did you lose that you still grieving? And what did you gain thought you never have one chosen but would not trade now?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think I lost being part of a global Silicon Valley technology conversation. And that I will not be able to reclaim. But what I gained is maybe a smaller life, but one that is based on truth, that is much richer, that is not based on a role or a title, but it's based on who I am and what I want to contribute to the world.
Beautifully articulated, Miss Nancy. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. It was a pleasure.
Likewise, Modcom people, see you soon.